The dress had taken Elena Marsh 4 months to make, and she'd stitched a small blue ribbon into the hem where no one would ever see it. Her own mother had done the same on Elena's wedding day. Some things you carry forward even when there's no one left who knows to look for them. It was not a grand dress. Elena had no illusions about that. She was 53, and she'd spent 30 years as a nurse, on her feet through the long nights, and her body told that story the way all bodies do, broad and soft and lived in. She'd made her peace with it a long time ago. So the dress she'd made was deep blue and well cut and modest, and she'd pressed it twice and hung it by the door. And she'd let herself, for one private moment, feel something like joy. Her only daughter was getting married. She'd raised Clara alone since the girl was 6, on a nurse's wages and a widow's stubbornness. Now Clara was marrying into the Whitmore family, and Elena was going to watch her walk down an aisle. That was worth 4 months of stitching. The morning of the final dress fitting, the boutique was the kind of place Elena had never had reason to enter. Pale marble, recessed light, a hush like a church. The woman at the front looked up, let her eyes travel the whole length of Elena, and said, helpfully, "Deliveries are around the back, dear." "I'm here for the Marsh fitting," Elena said gently. "Clara's my daughter." The woman's face did a small, quick recalculation. "Oh, of course. You don't look." And then she stopped, because there was no kind end to that sentence. "Right this way." Elena let it go. She had a great deal of practice at letting things go. Clara was on the pedestal in a cloud of white, and for one moment, before anything was said, Elena's whole chest filled with a love so plain and total it ached. Her girl. Standing in a gown that cost more than Elena made in 3 months, looking like something out of a life Elena had worked her whole life to give her. Mom. Clara's smile, when she turned, was real. Elena would hold on to that later, that the first smile was real. But it flickered into something more careful as her eyes moved to the elegant older woman rising from the velvet bench. "You must be Clara's mother." The woman crossed the room, perhaps 60, exquisitely thin, in the kind of quiet clothes that cost a fortune so they could pretend not to. "I'm Vivienne Whitmore, Sebastian's mother. We've heard so little about you." A pause, delicate as a blade. "Now I see why." It was said with a smile, in perfect politeness, and that was what made it cruel. If Elena flinched, she could be told she'd misunderstood. Elena did not flinch. She took the cool hand warmly. "Elena, it's lovely to meet the family Clara's joining. You must be very proud of your son." Vivienne's smile tightened at being met with grace where contempt had been laid as a trap. And out of the corner of her eye, Elena watched her own daughter, on the pedestal, look down at her hands and say nothing. That was the thing that hurt. Not Vivienne. Elena had met 100 Viviennes. It was Clara's silence. The way her girl heard the insult, recognized it, and chose the small safety of saying nothing over defending her own mother. The call came that evening. "Mom." Clara's voice on the phone was bright and brittle, the voice of someone who'd practiced a thing they were ashamed to say. "I wanted to talk about Saturday. The logistics, so everything goes smoothly." "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need." So the ceremony is very small, very tight on numbers. The Whitmores have all these people, and the church only seats so many, and Vivienne's been handling the list. The words came faster, tumbling, the way they had when she was little and had broken something. "So we thought, it might be easier if you came to the reception. After, not the ceremony, just the dinner part." Elena sat very still. "And Mom, please don't take this the wrong way. It's just, the Whitmores are very particular about the photographs, the aesthetic, and I thought, if you could wear something dark, something simple, nothing that draws the eye, just so you sort of blend, a silence. Then, smaller, you understand, don't you?" And Elena Marsh, sitting alone in the chair where she'd spent 20 years loving this girl with everything she had, understood completely. Her daughter was ashamed of her, was asking her to come late, sit at the back, wear dark colors, and not draw the eye. To fold her broad, lived-in body into the smallest possible shape so it wouldn't embarrass the bright world Clara was marrying into. "I understand," Elena said. Her voice did not shake. She had 30 years of practice at not letting it shake, at the bedsides of frightened people, and she used every year of it now. "I'll wear something dark, and I'll come to the reception." "Thank you, Mom," Clara breathed, the relief in it almost worse than the asking. "It's going to be so beautiful. Everyone who's anyone is coming. Even, you won't believe it, even Lorenzo Vale, he almost never comes to these things. The Whitmores are beside themselves." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Elena said, and did not ask who Lorenzo Vale was. It didn't matter to her. A name from a world she'd been asked to come late and sit at the back of. "I love you. Get some sleep." She hung up and sat in the dark a long time and did not cry. Crying was a thing you did when you still hoped a situation might be different, and Elena had stopped hoping somewhere in the middle of that call. After a while she rose, crossed to the door, and took down the deep blue dress with the ribbon in the hem. She folded it carefully and put it away in the back of the closet. Then she found something dark, something simple, something that would not draw the eye. She did not know that the wedding she'd just agreed to attend like a guest in her daughter's life would be the place where a man whose name had meant nothing to her would take one look at her broad, plain, unremarkable face and go absolutely still. She knew only that she would wear something dark and come to the reception and not draw the eye, because her daughter had asked her to, and she had spent her whole life making herself smaller so Clara could be bigger. One more time would not break her. Shame is taught, a lesson at a time, by people who know exactly what they're doing. 18 months earlier, Clara had brought Sebastian home for the first time. Elena had cooked all day. Her good stew, the one Clara had loved as a child, and set the small table with the cloth napkins she saved for occasions. Sebastian had been kind about all of it. That was the thing Elena would remember. He'd been genuinely, easily kind. It was Vivienne, 2 weeks later, who began the real work. "She's a lovely girl," Vivienne had told Clara over lunch at a restaurant where the water cost money. Clara repeated the whole conversation to Elena that night, still glowing, not yet hearing it. "She said I have such potential. She wants to help me. Polish off the rough edges," she said. "Isn't that generous, Mom?" "Raw edges," Elena had said. "You know. The way I talk. Which fork?" She says first impressions are everything in their world. Clara had laughed, delighted to be chosen. "She's going to teach me." Elena had said nothing. She'd learned, raising a daughter alone, that some things you cannot argue a child out of. You can only wait and be there when they land. The lessons took. Over a year, Elena watched her daughter become someone else. Better dressed, better spoken, and quietly, steadily ashamed. Clara stopped laughing the loud laugh that was her father's. She started saying "mummy" in front of Sebastian's friends, then stopped mentioning her mother at all. The Mother's Day card that had come every year since Clara was 6 did not come. Elena did not blame her. That was the part Vivienne could never have understood. Elena knew her daughter was not cruel, only drowning in a bright, cold world that had told her the price of belonging was forgetting where she came from. And where Clara came from was a broad, plain, tired woman in sensible shoes. You cannot reason a person out of shame. It breaks from the inside, or it doesn't break at all. Elena knew this, so she made her decision, and it was the kind she'd been making her whole life. She would give Clara this, too. The wedding. The back row. The dark dress. Because she had spent 30 years disappearing so that her daughter could be seen. She had been a nurse for those 30 years. A good one. She'd worked the night shifts no one wanted because they paid the difference between Clara having winter boots and not. She'd buried a husband when Clara was 6 and never remarried because there'd been nothing left of her to give. She had made every sacrifice invisible, on purpose, believing that was the point of a sacrifice. that the child should never feel its weight. She understood now the cruelty hidden in that. A child who never feels the weight never learns to see it. And a daughter who cannot see what her mother carried can be taught to see only the carrying. The broad back. The tired body. There had been one night Elena never spoke of. Not because it was dramatic, because to her it hadn't been. 26 years ago, the emergency floor, a hospital that no longer exists under that name. Clara was a baby. A young man came in, badly hurt, brought by men who made the other staff go quiet and disappear. The doctor remembered an urgent matter on another floor. Everyone found a reason to be elsewhere, because the boy was someone's, and danger hung off him like a smell. Elena had treated him. She had not asked whose son he was. It had never occurred to her that whose son a bleeding boy was should decide whether you helped him. She kept him alive until morning. 6 hours. And when the danger passed and better people were willing to be seen near him, she went home, fed her own baby breakfast, slept 4 hours, and went back for the next shift. She never learned his name. She filed the night away with every other night she'd spent keeping strangers alive and forgot it completely. Other people had not forgotten it, but that was a thread that ran underground, for now, and Elena had no idea she was holding the end of it. Across the city, in a house larger than any Elena had entered, an assistant ran a man named Lorenzo Vale through the week's obligations. "Saturday is the Whitmore wedding," the assistant said. "You agreed months ago. The association matters." Lorenzo did not look up. "I dislike weddings." "You gave your word." "I did." A man in his position did not break his word over something as small as boredom. He would go, stand at the back for an hour, shake the necessary hands, and leave. Fine. An hour. Not a minute more. He had no idea he was about to walk into the only question he'd carried for 26 years. The face he'd described to investigators 100 times and never found. The bride's embarrassing mother. The nurse. The nobody at the back of the list. He was going to a wedding he didn't want to attend. She was going to vanish into the back of it. By Saturday night, neither of those things would be true. The Whitmore estate had a ballroom with a ceiling like a church, and they had seated Elena at table 19, by the kitchen doors, where the staff came and went with trays. She did not mind the table. She'd told herself she wouldn't, and she didn't. She wore the dark dress. She sat where she'd been put. She watched her daughter, far across the room at the head table, glowing in white, and let the simple fact of Clara's happiness be enough. That was the plan. Come late, sit at the back, don't draw the eye. She'd had a lifetime of plans like that. A server set a plate in front of her, then leaned down. "Ma'am, are you with the catering team? We're short a pair of hands at the dessert station." "No," Elena said gently. "I'm the bride's mother." The young woman flushed scarlet. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. You were sitting back here, and it's all right. It's an easy mistake." It was not an easy mistake. But Elena had spent 53 years making other people's cruelties easy for them, smoothing the edges so no one had to feel the cut, and she did it now without thinking. Across the room, Vivienne Whitmore held court in pale silk, steering important people toward her son and his pretty bride. Once, her eyes swept the room and found Elena at table 19, and something satisfied moved across her face. The look of a woman whose arrangement had gone exactly to plan. Then she turned back to her guests and forgot her again. And then the room changed. Elena felt it before she understood it. The way a ward changes when a doctor everyone fears walks onto the floor. The conversations didn't stop. They adjusted. Heads turned toward the entrance, then turned quickly away, the way people look away from something too bright. Vivienne abandoned a sentence mid-word and moved toward the doors with an eagerness that was almost undignified. A man had come in. In his 50s, silver at the temples, in a dark suit that did not announce itself. He moved through the room the way water moves through a fence, without seeming to notice the obstacles, because for him there were none. The Whitmores converged on him like he was weather they'd been praying for. "Mr. Vale," Vivienne breathed, close enough for her voice to carry to table 19. "We are so honored, so deeply honored." Lorenzo Vale shook the necessary hands. He said the necessary things. His face was polite and entirely absent, the face of a man counting down an hour he'd promised to spend. He let himself be steered toward the head table, toward Sebastian, toward Clara, and on the way, his eyes passed over table 19 by the kitchen doors, and stopped. Elena felt it land on her and didn't understand it. A stranger's gaze, holding. She glanced behind her to see what he was looking at. There was only the kitchen door. When she turned back, he had gone still, completely still, in the middle of a room arranged around his motion, a stillness so total that Vivienne faltered beside him, following his line of sight to the heavy woman in the dark dress at the worst table in the room, and not understanding it at all. "Mr. Vale?" Vivienne said. "Is something?" He didn't answer. He was already walking, not toward the head table, toward the kitchen doors. Elena rose, because it seemed wrong to be sat when a man was bearing down on you with a face like that, though even now she assumed there'd been a mistake, that a man like this could have no business with a woman like her. He stopped an arm's length away. Up close, his face had something working under the calm, something she'd seen on family members in hospital corridors at 3 in the morning. Recognition fighting disbelief. "Forgive me," Lorenzo said, low. "I have to ask you something, and it will sound strange. Were you ever a nurse?" Elena blinked. "I was. 30 years. I retired 2 years ago. St. Brendan's. The old emergency floor. 26 years ago." He said it like a man laying down cards he'd held so long they'd worn soft. A young man came in at night, badly hurt. Everyone else found a reason to be elsewhere. The night surfaced in Elena slowly, from very far down. "I remember a night like that," she said. "More than one, honestly. There were a lot of nights." She studied him. "Why?" And Lorenzo Vale, a man the entire room had bent itself around, looked at the bride's embarrassing mother, and something cracked behind his eyes. "Because that was my son," he said. "Nico. He was 19. And every person in that hospital was too frightened of who his father was to touch him, except one nurse, who never asked, who kept him alive until morning, and who was gone before I could thank her." His jaw worked. "I have been looking for your face for 26 years. I had given up. I came here tonight to spend a tedious hour, and instead I'm standing in front of the only reason my son is alive." The kitchen doors swung. A server slipped past with a tray, oblivious. At the head table, far away, Clara was laughing at something Sebastian had said. Elena's chest had gone tight. She remembered now, not the boy's face, but the night's shape. The quiet that had emptied the floor. The men in the hall. "He lived, then," she said softly. "The boy. He lived. He's here tonight. Grown. With children of his own." Lorenzo's voice was not quite steady. "Because of you." For a moment, Elena let herself feel it. The simple warmth of learning that a thing she'd done in the dark and forgotten had grown into a whole life. And then she did the arithmetic of the room, and the warmth turned to alarm. Because Lorenzo Vale was the most powerful person in this ballroom. And she was a woman who'd been asked to sit at the back and not draw the eye. If this man made of her, right now, in front of everyone, the thing she suddenly understood he wanted to make of her, a hero, the center of the room, he would shatter, in one stroke, the careful smallness she'd promised her daughter. "Mr. Vale." She stepped closer, dropped her voice, and put a hand lightly on his arm. The gesture she'd used on 1,000 frightened people, the one that said, "I need you to hear me. I am very glad your son is alive. You don't know what it means to hear it. But I have to ask you for something, and I need you to do it, even though it won't make sense to you. Don't. Whatever you're about to do, announce me, honor me, tell this room who I am. Please don't. Not tonight." Lorenzo's brow drew down. "You don't understand. These people have you at the back by the kitchen. They have no idea who you." "They have me at the back because my daughter asked them to," Elena said quietly. "Because today is her wedding, and the family she's marrying into would rather I not be seen, and I've decided to let her have that. It's a gift, Mr. Vale. It might be the last big thing I get to give her. And if you stand up and turn me into someone important, you don't lift me up. You make her wedding about her embarrassing mother after all, just not the way she planned. You take her day and make it mine." She held his eyes. "I didn't keep your son alive to be paid back with a scene at my daughter's wedding. I kept him alive because he was bleeding and I was there. Let it stay that." Lorenzo Vale was a man unaccustomed to being told no, and more unaccustomed to being told no for reasons that had nothing to do with fear of him. He studied her. The dark dress, the worst table, the calm, plain face refusing the one thing he had the power to give, to protect the very daughter who'd put her there. "In 26 years, he said slowly, I imagined this moment many ways. None of them was the woman asking me to pretend she's no one. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile. You are exactly as I should have expected, and nothing like it. Is that a yes?" "It is a yes. For tonight, you are no one. I'll say nothing." Then, lower. "But I'm going to stay near this table, Mrs. Marsh, and I'm going to watch how these people treat the woman they don't know they should be on their knees to. That much, you don't get to refuse me." He returned to the bright center of the room. He shook the hands. He played the honored guest. But something had shifted, and Vivienne, sharp, watchful Vivienne, had seen the most important man at her party cross her ballroom to speak, low and long, with the nobody at table 19. And Vivienne Whitmore did not like things she couldn't account for sitting at the back of her own party. Lorenzo kept his word, and he kept his position. He stayed near the back of the room, a glass in his hand he never drank from, and he watched. He watched the catering staff be the only people who spoke to her. He watched her thank each one by name, having learned their names in an hour. He watched a cousin of the groom stop at table 19, ask Elena to take a coat to the cloakroom, and walk off without waiting for the answer. And he watched Elena rise and take the coat and hang it, because making a scene would have cost Clara more than her own dignity cost her. It was, Lorenzo thought, the most remarkable thing he had ever watched a person not do. He came to her table during the dancing, when the lights had dropped and no one was counting who sat where. He pulled out the chair across from her. A man worth more than the estate, sitting at table 19 by the kitchen doors, and set down his untouched glass. "You learned the servers' names," he said. "They're the ones doing the work. Somebody should." "My son said the same thing about you." Years later, when he could finally talk about that night, Lorenzo turned the glass a quarter turn on the cloth. "He didn't remember your face. He was too far gone. But he remembered a voice telling him he wasn't going to die, and that the voice used his first name, and he'd never told it his name. You read it off the chart and decided he should hear it from someone who sounded like she meant it." Elena said nothing for a moment. "You remember a great deal," she said, "for something I've forgotten. You forgot it because for you it was Tuesday. I remember it because it was the worst night of my life, and you walked into the middle of it and did the one decent thing in a building full of people too afraid to. I don't forget debts, Mrs. Marsh." Across the room, laughter went up around the head table. Clara, radiant, the center of her bright new world. Elena watched her for a moment, and her face did something quiet and unguarded that Lorenzo did not look away from. "She wasn't always like this," Elena said. "You should know that, since you're sitting here judging the company. My daughter is not a cruel girl. She made me a card every Mother's Day until she was 19. A small breath. They taught her to be ashamed of me the way you teach anyone anything. Slowly. One reasonable-sounding lesson at a time until she couldn't see it happening. And you let them." "I let her," Elena corrected gently. "There's a difference. She's 26 and in love and terrified of being sent back where she came from. I'm 53 and I came from there and I'm not afraid of it. One of us can afford to be patient, so it's going to be me." She met his eyes. "She'll come back to herself. The good ones do, once they're far enough in to see what they traded. I just have to still be standing here when she does." Lorenzo was quiet a long moment. "I could end this tonight," he said finally, his voice dropping into something flatter. Not with violence. I don't need violence for people like the Whitmores. One sentence from me about who you are, and Vivienne Whitmore would spend the rest of her life telling the story of how she seated a hero by the kitchen. I would enjoy giving you that. Say the word and the whole room flips in an instant. Wouldn't that teach your daughter faster than patience? It was a real offer, and a tempting one, and Elena turned it over honestly before she set it down. No. No. If you flip the room, Clara learns the wrong lesson. She learns that I mattered all along because a powerful man says I did. That the way you earn respect is to turn out to be connected to someone frightening. That's the exact lesson Vivienne already taught her, that people are worth what their connections are worth. You'd just be proving it from the other side. She shook her head. I don't want my daughter to value me because Lorenzo Vale bowed to me. I want her to value me because she finally remembers, on her own, what I am. You can humiliate Vivienne for me. You can't make my daughter see me. Only she can do that. And she has to do it without a powerful man holding a gun to her conscience. Lorenzo looked at her for a long time. You keep refusing the things I'm able to do. The thanks. The scene. The reckoning. Every weapon I have, you wave away. Because the thing that's actually broken here isn't something your weapons can fix, Elena said simply. You solve problems by being the most powerful person in the room. I spent 30 years in a job where the most important thing in the room was usually the quietest. We see different rooms, Mr. Vale. In mine, the fix is patience. And you can't buy patience, or frighten it, or hand it to someone. You can only do it. So let me do it my way. And Lorenzo Vale, who had walked into this wedding to spend a tedious hour, and found instead the woman he owed his son's life, sat back in the cheap chair at table 19 and felt the specific humbling of meeting a person whose strength ran in a direction his own had never learned to go. All right, your way. No scene, no announcement. Then, quietly, but I'll tell you what I told you before. I'm staying near this table. And if there comes a moment tonight when these people stop merely overlooking you and start something crueler, the kind of cruelty that can't be smoothed over with grace, then the agreement ends. I won't watch worse than a hero hanging a stranger's coat. Not even for you. Elena almost smiled. Then let's both hope it doesn't come to that. Mrs. Marsh. He rose, buttoning his jacket, the honored guest resuming his shape. In my experience, people like Vivienne Whitmore can never quite leave a thing alone once they sense it slipping. You've drawn the eye after all. Mine, which means hers. She'll need to put you back in your place before the night is out, just to be sure of it. There was a warning in it, and something almost like care. Be ready. I don't think your way and my way are going to stay separate much longer. He walked back into the light, and across the room, Vivienne Whitmore watched him go. Then turned her cool eyes, slowly, toward the heavy woman in the dark dress at the back of her ballroom. The nobody the most powerful man in the city kept walking over to speak with. The arithmetic of it troubled her, and Vivienne did not tolerate things that troubled her for long. Elena decided to leave before the cake. It was the sensible thing. She'd seen the way Vivienne kept finding her across the room, that cool assessing look, and she knew what it meant, the way she'd known 100 warning signs in 30 years of reading rooms. Something was coming. And the simplest way to keep it from landing on Clara's wedding was to not be there when it did. She found Clara at the edge of the dance floor, between songs, flushed and happy. I'm going to head home, sweetheart. It's been beautiful. You were beautiful. I just wanted to say it before I went. Something flickered in Clara's face. Relief, and under it, so quick Elena almost missed it, a thin thread of shame at the relief. You're leaving already? You don't have to. I think it's best. Elena reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her daughter's ear, the gesture of 20 years of mornings. I'm proud of you. I hope you know that. Whatever happens, however far you go, I'm proud of you. Mom. Clara's voice wavered. For a moment the bright lacquer cracked, and underneath was the girl who'd made the cards. Thank you for being good about everything, about tonight, for being good about being hidden. Elena heard the whole sentence Clara couldn't finish. She only smiled. Go dance. Your husband's looking for you. And she turned to go. And that should have been the end of it. The quiet exit. The sacrifice completed. Except that two people would not let it be the end. The first was Lorenzo. He saw the dark dress slipping out the back of the room the way it had slipped in, and he set down his glass. He'd given his word, no scene. But he hadn't given his word to watch her vanish, uncounted, paid for a stranger's son's life with nothing but a long evening at the worst table in the room. He began, unhurried, to cross the floor after her. The second was Vivienne. Vivienne had spent the last hour deciding what to do about the troubling woman at table 19, and arrived at a solution that pleased her because it solved two problems at once. The nobody was leaving. Good. But she'd drawn Lorenzo Vale's attention, and that could not be allowed to suggest that someone Vivienne had seated by the kitchen might be worth a powerful man's time. The story had to be corrected. The room had to be reminded, before this woman left, of exactly what she was. So Vivienne intercepted her near the doors, with a small crowd of important guests in easy earshot, and pitched her voice to Carrie. Leaving so soon? I do hope the staff took care of you back there. We weren't quite sure where to put you, if I'm honest. There's no proper category, is there, for a delicate gesture, taking in the dark dress, the sensible shoes, the whole of Elena. Well, for the bride's people. I told Clara we'd manage. And we did manage, didn't we? You've been no trouble at all. The smile sharpened, which is really all one can ask in the circumstances. A few nearby guests tittered, the way rooms always titter when someone gives them permission. The cruelty was perfectly constructed, deniable, polite, impossible to answer without seeming to have caused the scene yourself. And Elena nearly smoothed it over. She felt the old reflex rise. Let it go, make it easy, and opened her mouth to say something gracious and small. But across the room, Clara had heard it. Clara had turned at the sound of her mother's name, the way you turn at your own, and stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor, champagne in her hand, watching Vivienne Whitmore hold her mother up in front of the most important people in their world as a thing with no proper category. And something moved across Clara's face that Elena saw and Vivienne did not. A flinch, a horror, the first crack in 18 months of careful lacquer. This was the moment. Elena understood it even as it happened. Her daughter was standing at a fork she didn't know she'd reached. She could laugh along, the way she'd learned to. She could look away. Or she could cross the room. For a long, terrible second, Clara did nothing at all. And in that second of her daughter's silence, which hurt more than anything Vivienne could say, Elena made a choice of her own. Not to wait and see whether her daughter would finally choose her. She would not put that weight on Clara in front of all these people. She would not make her girl's love into a public test. She would take it off her. She would simply leave, with grace, and let her daughter off the hook one final time. Mrs. Whitmore. Elena's voice was warm and even and carried just as well as Vivienne's. You've a lovely home, and your son seems a kind young man, and I wish him and my daughter every happiness. She gathered her coat over her arm. I won't trouble your party any further. Good night. It was gracious. It was an exit. It was, Elena thought, the cleanest way to take the blade out of the room and carry it out the door with her, so it couldn't fall on Clara. She had her hand on the door when Lorenzo Vale's voice cut across the entire ballroom. Mrs. Marsh. Not loud. He didn't need loud. The room simply stopped, the way it had when he arrived, every head turning. You're leaving before I've had the chance to do something I've waited 26 years to do. Elena turned. Mr. Vale. There was a plea in it. Don't. But Vivienne had already rounded on him, delighted, misreading everything, certain the great man was about to side with her against the embarrassment by the door. Oh, Mr. Vale, you mustn't trouble yourself. She was just. Vivienne. Lorenzo did not raise his voice, and that was what made the whole room go cold. "Be quiet." The agreement was over. Elena saw it in his face. She'd asked him to let her stay no one, and he'd kept that word as long as the room had only overlooked her. But Vivienne had reached for something crueler, in front of witnesses, the exact line he'd told her he would not watch crossed. Lorenzo walked into the center of the silent ballroom and turned to face the hundreds of important people who had spent the evening not seeing her. "You've all been wondering," he said, "why I keep crossing this room to speak with a woman you seated by the kitchen." "Don't," Elena said. One word, across the silent room. Lorenzo stopped. He turned to her, and for a moment the two of them stood at opposite ends of a ballroom full of held breath. The most powerful man in the city, and the woman asking him, again, to put down the only gift he had to give. "They've earned it," Lorenzo said quietly. "You know they have. It's not about what they've earned. It's about what she learns." Elena came a few steps into the room, her coat still over her arm. She didn't look at Vivienne. She looked across the floor, to the girl in white standing frozen with champagne in her hand. "If you tell them, they'll be on their knees in a minute. And my daughter will watch them grovel and learn that her mother was worth something all along, because a frightening man said so. That's the same poison, Mr. Vale, just poured from the other cup. Then what would you have me do?" There was something almost anguished in it, from a man not built for anguish. "Watch you walk out? Let that be the last thing this room remembers of you. Her little speech about categories?" "Yes," Elena said. "If that's the price of letting my daughter find me on her own, yes." And it was Clara who broke. Not loudly. She set her champagne down on the nearest table, and the small click of the glass was the loudest thing in the room. She'd heard all of it. Vivienne's cruelty, her mother's grace, the powerful stranger pleading to honor a woman the whole party had hidden. And 18 months of careful lacquer was cracking down the middle of her in real time, in front of everyone, and she made no move to hide it. "Mom." Clara's voice came out thin. It carried anyway. "What is he talking about?" The room turned to the bride. Elena's face changed. Alarm now, the instinct to protect. "Sweetheart, it's nothing. It's an old." "It's not nothing." Clara took a step off the dais, then another. She was crossing the floor now, slow, toward table 19, toward the back of the room where her mother had been put. He said 26 years. He said something he's waited to do. Her eyes were filling. "Mom, what did you never tell me?" And here was the crisis, laid open in front of 300 people. Because Elena could lie. She could smooth it over one final time, protect the day, let Clara marry into her bright world with the comfortable belief that her mother was exactly the small, embarrassing thing she'd been taught to see. The gracious exit was still there, even now. Elena looked at her daughter. Really looked, the way you look at someone you've loved past the edge of your own dignity, and understood that the kindest lie she could tell would also be the cruelest. That to protect Clara from the truth now would be to leave her, forever. The woman who hid her mother at her own wedding and never knew why it was unforgivable. Some sacrifices you make by staying silent, and some you make by finally, after a lifetime, refusing to. 26 years ago, Elena said, steady, speaking only to Clara, as if the room weren't there at all. "I was working nights at St. Brendan's. You were a baby. A young man was brought in, hurt very badly, and everyone on that floor was too frightened of his family to go near him. So I went near him. I didn't ask who he was. I just kept him alive until morning. And then I came home and made your breakfast and never thought about it again. It wasn't brave, sweetheart. It was just my job. That's the whole story. That's all I never told you, because to me it wasn't worth telling." Clara had stopped a few feet away. "And him?" she whispered. "Mr. Vale?" It was Lorenzo who answered, gently, from the center of the room. "The young man was my son, Nico. He is alive tonight, married, a father. Because your mother decided that whose son a bleeding boy was should not determine whether he lived. Every other person in that hospital made the safe choice. She made the only decent one. I have searched for her face for 26 years to thank her, and I found her tonight, at the back of your wedding, hanging a stranger's coat, being told by your mother-in-law that there's no proper category for her. He let it land. There is a category, Mrs. Whitmore. The word is hero. You seated one by your kitchen. Vivienne Whitmore had gone the color of ash. Around her, the important people were turning, slowly, to look at her. And the contempt she'd built was draining out of the room and pooling, instead, around her own thin shoulders. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. But Elena was not looking at Vivienne. She had not looked at Vivienne once. She was looking at her daughter, who stood in the middle of 300 people in a white dress, her face coming apart. "You were going to leave," Clara said. Tears were running freely now, taking the careful makeup with them. "You were going to let her say that category thing, and just leave, and not tell me. You'd have let me go on thinking." Her voice broke. "Mum, I asked you to wear something dark. I asked you to come late. I sat you by the kitchen. And you..." She couldn't finish it. "You're my daughter," Elena said simply, as if that answered everything. Because to her, it did. There was never going to be a version of tonight where I made it harder for you. Not even this one. Especially not this one. And that, not Lorenzo's words, not the revelation, not Vivienne's ruin, was the thing that finally broke Clara Marsh all the way open. Not the discovery that her mother was a hero to a powerful stranger. The discovery that her mother had been about to swallow one more humiliation, silently, and walk out into the night uncounted, rather than spend a single coin of her daughter's happiness. Even after everything Clara had done. The shame Vivienne had spent 18 months building did not survive contact with that. Clara crossed the last few feet, and in front of 300 of the most important people in the city, in a wedding dress that cost more than her mother made in 3 months, she put her arms around her broad, plain, tired mother, and held on, and did not care who watched. "I'm so sorry," Clara said into her shoulder, over and over, the words muffled and wrecked. "I'm so sorry. I forgot. I let them make me forget. I'm so sorry, Mom." Elena held her daughter in the middle of the silent ballroom, and over Clara's shaking shoulder she met Lorenzo Vale's eyes, and he inclined his head. Not in triumph, but in something quieter. The acknowledgement of a man who had been shown, tonight, a kind of strength he'd spent his life too powerful to need. He had wanted to flip the room with one sentence. In the end, the room had been flipped by a woman who refused to let him. For a moment, the ballroom held. 300 people watching a bride weep into her mother's shoulder, and not one of them sure what they were allowed to do. Then a man rose from a table near the front. He was perhaps 45, broad-shouldered, with his father's stillness and a softness around the eyes that Lorenzo's had lost somewhere along the way. He'd been seated quietly among the family all evening, another well-dressed guest, no one anyone at table 19 would have looked at twice. He crossed the floor now, and the room parted for him the way it had for his father, and he stopped in front of Elena. "Mrs. Marsh." Nico Vale's voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it so. "You won't remember my face. I was told you read my name off a chart and said it like you knew me. I've had 26 years to think about that voice." He stopped, started again. "I have 2 daughters. The older one is named Elena. My wife and I never knew who we were naming her for. Only that my father said, when she was born, that there was a name we owed a debt to, and we should give it to someone we loved." His jaw worked. "It was yours. It's been yours the whole time. I've been carrying your name for 9 years without a face to put to it." Elena, who had kept her composure through Vivienne and through Lorenzo and through her own daughter's arms, did not keep it through that. A nurse learns to hold a great deal. But there is a particular thing that happens when you learn that a night you forgot has been quietly growing, all these years, into living children with your name. And Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, and her eyes filled, and for once she did not smooth anything over. "There's a little girl named Elena," she said faintly. "There's a little girl named Elena who's asleep at home right now," Nico said. "Who's going to meet you tomorrow, if you'll let her. I've wanted to introduce you to her since before she could talk." A wet, broken laugh. I just didn't have you yet. And the ballroom, which had spent the entire evening agreeing not to see the woman at table 19, now could not look anywhere else. It was into that silence that Vivienne Whitmore made her last mistake, because she could not bear it. The reversal, the room's contempt pooled around her own feet, the nobody she'd built her evening on standing in the center of everything she valued. She reached, the way her kind always reach when the ground gives way, for the one tool she had left. "Well," she said, and forced a brittle laugh, pitched to recruit the room back to her side. "It's all very touching. But let's not lose our heads. One good deed a long time ago doesn't change who a person actually is, does it? Where they come from. What they. Mrs. Whitmore. It was not Lorenzo. It was not Nico. It was Clara." Clara had let go of her mother and turned, and there was nothing of the careful remade girl left in her face. Mascara streaked, dress crushed, she stepped between Vivienne and Elena, and when she spoke her voice was her father's loud, honest voice, the one she'd been trained out of, and it filled the room. "Don't you say one more word about where my mother comes from." Clara was shaking. "She comes from double shifts, so I had winter boots. She comes from a pawned wedding ring the year the heat broke." "Yeah, I found out, Mom, years ago. I just never said. She comes from 20 years of making herself smaller so I could be bigger, and I let you." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I let you teach me to be ashamed of the best person I've ever known. In her own daughter's wedding, I sat her by the kitchen." She drew a breath. "That's the only thing in this room anyone should be ashamed of. And it's mine, not hers. Never hers." The silence after was absolute. Vivienne Whitmore looked around the ballroom for a single ally. One face that would laugh with her, side with her, restore the order she'd built, and found none. They had already moved. The crowd that had tittered at her cruelty an hour ago had no use for her now. That was the thing about a room like this, the thing Vivienne had spent her life serving and never understood. It had no loyalties, only weather, and the weather had turned. She had taught a room to despise a woman for being small, and she had just been made, in front of all of them, the smallest thing in it. She gathered what was left of herself and walked out of her own son's wedding, and no one stopped her, and no one followed. Elena watched her go and felt no triumph in it. Being proven right over someone gave her nothing. She had never been in it to win. She turned away from the door before Vivienne had even reached it, already done with her, and put her hand on her daughter's wet face. "That was your father's voice," she said softly. "I've missed it. I've missed it too," Clara whispered. "I didn't know I'd put it away." Lorenzo Vale came to stand beside them, and the room, slowly, awkwardly, then with gathering force, began to do the thing rooms do when they realize which way the weather has gone. Someone began to applaud. Then more. Then all of them, 300 important people on their feet for the woman they'd seated by the kitchen, a sound like rain coming on. Elena stood in the middle of it, broad and plain, in a dark dress chosen so she wouldn't draw the eye, drawing every eye in the room. She had not done a single thing tonight to earn the applause. She had only refused, over and over, to become smaller than she was. And refused, just as hard, to become larger at her daughter's expense. She'd held the exact shape of herself against a room determined to shrink her, and a man determined to inflate her, and in the end the shape had simply turned out to be the truest thing in the building. She didn't acknowledge the applause. She'd never learned how. It had never once been aimed at her before. She just held her daughter and looked, across the noise, at Lorenzo Vale. "You kept your word. You never did flip the room." "No, I didn't have to. I only had to stand near the table long enough to watch you do it without me." Something moved in his face the city had never seen there. 26 years I thought I was looking for someone to thank. It turns out I was looking for someone to learn from. "I spent 30 years at bedsides," Elena said. "I've heard stranger things from frightened men." She almost smiled. "It's all right, Mr. Vale. You can put the debt down now. It was paid the second your son lived. Everything after that was just you carrying something heavy because you didn't know how to set it down." Lorenzo Vale looked at her for a long moment, in the middle of a standing ovation neither of them had asked for. Perhaps. But I find I'm not quite ready to set all of it down just yet. The marriage survived, in the end. That surprised people who'd been in the room. It survived because Sebastian Whitmore, whatever his mother had made of the rest of the family, turned out to be his own man. And the morning after the wedding, he drove to Elena's small flat without Clara, and sat at her kitchen table and apologized for a year and a half of things he'd been too comfortable to notice. "I let her run it," he said, meaning Vivienne. "It was easier. I told myself it was just how the family did things." He looked at his hands. "Clara told me about the boots. The ring. I didn't know who I was marrying into. I'd like to, if you'll have me." Elena made him tea and let him stay, because she had never in her life met a sincere apology she couldn't find room for. That was not weakness. She'd simply learned, over 53 years, that the people worth keeping are the ones who come back when they realize they were wrong, and that the whole point of leaving a door open is so someone can walk through it. Clara walked through hers slowly over the following months. She did not become a different person overnight. Shame doesn't lift like a fog. It lifts like a tide, in and out, gaining ground only gradually. But she came to Sunday dinners again. She brought the loud laugh back out of storage. She started, haltingly, telling Sebastian's remaining family the truth about where she came from. Not apologizing for it now, but planting it like a flag. The Mother's Day card came that year. It was the first thing Elena had cried over in a long time, and she cried over it alone and kept it in the drawer with the others. Vivienne Whitmore did not apologize, and Elena did not wait for it. The story of the wedding traveled the way those stories do, and Vivienne found that the bright, cold world she'd ruled was perfectly happy to drop her the moment she stopped being useful to it. The same blade she'd lived by turned at last on her. Elena took no satisfaction in it. She thought, when she thought of Vivienne at all, that it must be a cold thing to have spent your whole life believing people were worth their connections, and to learn it only when your own ran out. And Elena met a little girl named Elena. Nico brought her the day after the wedding, as promised. A serious 9-year-old who studied the large, plain woman in the doorway with great care before deciding something, and then took her hand without being told to, the way children do when they've worked out that someone is safe. "Daddy says I'm named after you," the girl said. "He says you saved him before I was born. Does that mean you saved me too?" "No," Elena said, crouching to her level, the way she'd crouched to 1,000 frightened people. "It means your daddy did something brave by living. I just helped. The brave part was his." The girl considered this. "That's not what Grandpa says." "Grandpas exaggerate," Elena said, and the little girl laughed, and that was the beginning of a thing that would last the rest of Elena's life. A second family, grown from a night she'd forgotten, full of people who had never once needed to be taught to see her. And Lorenzo. He came back. Not all at once, and never with a scene. He'd learned, that night, that scenes were not the currency this woman traded in. He came to Sunday dinners, eventually, the most dangerous man in the city, folding himself into a chair at a nurse's small table, learning the names of everyone there the way she did, because she'd shown him it was worth doing. He did not court her the way powerful men court. He simply kept showing up and helping with the dishes and being, in that one small flat, no one in particular. And Elena, who had spent her whole life being looked past, found she did not mind being looked at by a man who'd finally learned how to do it without trying to make her into something other than what she was. "You could have anything," she told him once, drying a plate he'd washed. "Anyone. Why, a retired nurse with bad knees and a daughter who took 2 years to come back to her. Because I spent my whole life around people who wanted to be the biggest thing in every room," Lorenzo said. "And then I met a woman who spent an entire evening trying to be the smallest, for someone else's sake, and was the largest person there without ever trying." He set down a glass. "I know the difference now between what's impressive and what's rare. I stopped wanting impressive a long time ago. It was not a grand romance. They were both too old and too sane for grand. It was two people at the right end of their lives, drying dishes, who had each spent decades being a certain kind of strong and were quietly relieved to have found someone who understood the cost of it. The deep blue dress came out of the back of the closet, in the end. Elena wore it to the christening of Nico's third child. A boy, this time, where she stood as godmother, broad and plain and entirely visible, the blue ribbon stitched into the hem where no one would ever see it but her. Clara stood beside her and held her arm and was not ashamed and would never be ashamed again. And if anyone in that church had asked who the large woman in blue was, there were a dozen people ready to tell them, though by then no one needed to ask. They all knew. They'd hidden her at the back of a wedding because she didn't fit the picture. She turned out to be the whole reason there was a picture at all. So that's Elena's story. And here's the part I keep coming back to. Everyone in that ballroom made the same mistake. Vivienne, the guests, even, for a while, her own daughter. They all looked at a large, plain, tired woman in a dark dress at the back of the room and decided there was nothing there worth seeing. And they were standing 20 feet from a hero the whole time. That's the thing about the people we decide not to look at. We never find out what they did in the dark, on the nights nobody was watching, because we've already decided they're not the kind of person who does anything at all. Elena saved a life and forgot about it. The room couldn't see it, because the room had decided in advance there was nothing in her to see. So here's my question for you. The puzzle one first. Elena was the nurse the whole time, of course, but the story dropped quiet hints before Lorenzo ever said a word. The way she learned the servers' names, the things she said about the quietest person in the room mattering most. Looking back, what was the first moment you knew? The first clue that this overlooked woman was carrying something the room couldn't see? Tell me in the comments. I love reading which detail gave it away for you. And then the real one. The one I actually want to know. Have you ever been ashamed of a parent and regretted it later, once you were old enough to see what they carried for you? Or are you the parent? The mom, the dad, the one who made yourself smaller so your child could be bigger and got hidden at the back of the picture for your trouble? Tell me below. Not the polished version. The real one. Because I think a lot of us are still carrying an apology we never quite said out loud, or still waiting to hear one. And maybe, just for tonight, this is a place to say it. If Elena's story reached something in you, if you've ever been the one at the back of the room who turned out to be the heart of it, subscribe and stay with me. There's another underestimated woman coming next, and the world is about to find out exactly what it overlooked. I'll see you in the next one.